Pope Francis releases a new exhortation on youth this week. Christ is alive, and there's a new Archbishop in Washington. The papal posse, Robert Royal and Father Gerald Murray, are here to react. And we'll take a closer look at the Vatican-China deal, U.S. foreign policy, and a new academy that seeks to defend the Judeo Christian West. Former Chief White House Strategist Steve Bannon is here. Finally, the pro-life film Unplanned is an unexpected hit. The film's subject, Abby Johnson, and its star, ASHLEY BRATCHER. Join us for more. The World Over begins right now.
Now, from Washington, D.C., Raymond Arroyo.
A warm welcome to all of you joining us in the United States and the world over. An important show for you tonight. Robert Royal, Father Gerald Murray, Steve Bannon, ASHLEY BRATCHER, and Abby Johnson are all straight ahead. If you'd like to comment on tonight's show, send me a tweet. I'm at Raymond Arroyo. Of course, keep the tweets clean. You can email us at worldover@ewtn.com. First, some news. The Vatican released an apostolic exhortation by Pope Francis this week. It's titled, Christ is Alive. The 33,000-word document was published on April 2nd. It was written in response to last October's Youth Synod. Francis maps out what he calls an open church that he feels would be more attractive to young people. More on what that means in our next segment. And a new shepherd's coming to the Archdiocese of Washington. As first reported by the Catholic news agency, Archbishop Wilton Gregory of Atlanta was named to succeed the embattled Cardinal Donald Wuerl, who stepped down in the wake of the Pennsylvania grand jury report and then the McCarrick scandal. Gregory, who is 71, will be the first African-American Archbishop of Washington. He served as president of the U.S. Bishops' Conference when the sex abuse crisis first broke back in the early 2000s. Here's what Gregory had to say in February of 2004, just after the release of the John J. Criminal Report.
I can say with absolute assurance that the bishops now have in place the means of responding immediately to allegations, assisting victims, and removing offenders from ministry. The terrible history recorded here today is history.
Joining me now with in-depth analysis of the Gregory appointment and Francis's new apostolic exhortation is a priest of the Archdiocese of New York, Father Gerald Murray, and editor-in-chief of the Catholic Thing, Robert Royal. Papal Posse, welcome back. Okay, well, let's jump right into it. Before we get to Christ is Alive, we've got to start with this big breaking story of the week, the appointment of Wilton Gregory as the next Archbishop of Washington. The announcement was made today. He accepted the appointment. Here's the presser.
I want to come to know you, to hear your stories, to listen to the emotions, experiences, and expectations that have shaped your precious Catholic faith, for better or for worse. I want to offer you hope. I will rebuild your trust.
Gentlemen, your initial thoughts.
Well, I think that's a breath of fresh air to just talk about gaining trust, because there's a great deal of upsetness, outright anger, I would say, and a lack of trust here in the Archdiocese of Washington because of the whole McCarrick story and the Wuerl sequel to that. I have to say in all candor, though, that this seems to me to be, I'm almost tempted to joke about this, that this is Cardinal Wuerl by other means. We don't, I don't really see this as that much changing a page, because Wilton Gregory, Archbishop Gregory, has been close to McCarrick initially, says he was deceived by him over all those years, has been close to Cardinal Wuerl. So I think there's going to be a great deal of continuity, and maybe also that's something that the Vatican wanted. But I think we can at least hope that he recognizes how profoundly disturbed the Archdiocese of Washington has been, and in fact the whole nation, over what's happened.
Father Murray, a source told me in Washington today, this is business as usual. That's how they're interpreting this particular appointment. Archbishop Gregory is referred to as a moderate in many areas, lauded for his handling of the abuse crisis. He is the father and one of the architects of the zero tolerance policy, but that was only extended toward priests, not bishops. Did they clean up the sex abuse crisis properly then? And how, your thoughts on this appointment?
No, obviously it wasn't cleaned up properly because it's still ongoing. I mean, we're still having all these revelations. I think for the Archbishop to gain the trust of the people here and then also in the whole country, he has to come and do a kind of cleanup duty and find out how did McCarrick thrive? How did it happen? What happened when Pope Benedict put these provisions on him? In other words, an accountability for what happened in the past so that it will identify, we're not going to do these things in the future. Now, I will say I'm very happy to have the first black Archbishop of Washington because black Catholics are a very important part of the history of the Church in the United States, and Washington, Baltimore area, one of the centers of black Catholicism. So that's I'm very happy about. But, you know, the issue here right now is, do the people trust the hierarchy? And the polls show they don't, so they have to work hard to gain that trust.
I want to move on to talk about another big story, got very little attention. The Archbishop of Guam, this Archbishop Apuron, was convicted of multiple abuses, sexual abuses of minors. He had a canonical trial. He was found guilty, and this was recently affirmed. But they're allowing him to continue to be called an archbishop. He's not being laicized. What do you make of this?
I find this very troubling. The Archbishop there, Apuron, has been found guilty. The trial was conducted by Cardinal Burke. There was full evidentiary presentation and multiple convictions, sexual abuse of minors. This man should no longer enjoy the Catholic priesthood. He should be punished by being removed. And I find it to be very inconsistent with what the Pope said last August. The Pope talked about zero tolerance after the Pennsylvania report came forward. This man is basically being given a retirement package. You can't present yourself as an archbishop, but otherwise you stay the way you were. You're just a retired man. This isn't good.
As we heard from Archbishop Gregory earlier, the history in this report is history. It's not history. It's still ongoing.
With us. And the problem is that the Holy See has got a real hot potato here that it doesn't really know how to deal with. I think this case, I think Father is absolutely right. This is an outrageous case, and it seems very clear to me what they ought to be doing. They've been pulling back a little bit on this notion of zero tolerance. They say, I was over for the summit on abuse. They say that there are certain countries, Islamic countries in particular, where to accuse an archbishop or a bishop of abuse of some kind is virtually a death sentence. Okay, that's a prudential judgment to make. But when we have a case like this, that is, to all appearances, even far worse than the McCarrick case, as far as we can tell, in terms of at least the minors that were abused. The Holy See, unless the Holy See presents a kind of a unified policy about how these things are going to be dealt with, we're going to continue to have this doubt about whether it's really being dealt with or whether there's this fuzzy equality that certain people get off and others are given benefits. We don't have a rule of law that says you do X, Y happens.
Well, in this youth exhortation, it's mute on this issue of zero tolerance. Doesn't talk about it at all, which sounds like it's off the table. I've got to get to this. The Pope made headlines this week on the plane back from Morocco. He doubled down on his condemnation of the death penalty. Listen.
Oggi noi abbiamo tolto dal catechismo della Chiesa Cattolica la pena di morte. 300 anni fa bruciavano vivi gli eresi perché la Chiesa sia accresciuta nella coscienza morale, il rispetto della persona, no? E la libertà di culto cresce pure. Anche noi dobbiamo continuare a crescere.
Father Murray, has the Church evolved beyond her teaching on capital punishment?
This is an extremely serious problem, Raymond. The Pope does not have the power to change the teaching of the Church, which is the perennial constant teaching, that the death penalty is moral in some cases. The use of it has never been described as immoral. It's executing people like Adolf Hitler, if he had made it out of the bunker. That would not be a violation of Adolf Hitler's dignity. In fact, it would be an affirmation of the dignity of humanity that someone who murders 6 million Jews and tens of millions of others die because of the war he started, for him to be executed would have been a good thing. Everybody would have agreed. This is a very serious, the Church does not change its teaching on matters that have been taught consistently simply because it becomes unpopular in the modern age.
And part of this is an idea that the Church teaching was you give a person guilty of heinous crimes a time period that they can reevaluate what they did, maybe make peace with God and save their soul, which is more important than the body. I mean, in the mind of the church.
Absolutely.
I want to move on. We've got so much to get to. I'd love you to take cracks at all this. Pope Francis also spoke again about the fear of migrants on the plane.
È vero che tanta gente di buona volontà, non solo cattolici, ma gente buona, di buona volontà, è un po' presa dalla paura, che è la predica usuale dei populismi. La paura. Si semina paura e poi si prendono delle decisioni, no? La paura è l'inizio delle dittature.
So, fear of migrants, fear of the other, is this the reason behind border enforcement, and is this the right way to look, the right frame to put around this issue? Robert Royal.
Well, as a reporter asked the Holy Father on that flight, the peoples of Europe, the various nationalities of Europe, are directly opposed to the kind of thing that he is proposing. That in fact they all feel threatened, not only physically and in sort of a normal security sense, but they feel by a loss of their national identities in Europe. I mean, we feel somewhat the same thing because of our border problems with Mexico, but it isn't as acute as it is, as it is in Europe. Look, I think that this is a place where he's proposing, he's confusing a kind of a moral principle that we do have to take care of the widow, the orphan, the stranger among us, with a political policy. The policy about how much immigration a country can accept is something that public officials are going to have to be able to determine. The current regimes in Italy, for example, say that they have 5 million poor people in Italy already, Italians that are poor people. And the Minister of the Interior, Salvini, for example, often says, well, what am I going to do? Am I going to admit another 1 million or 2 million or 5 million people?
Or take care of my own.
I have to take care of my own first. So there are multiple considerations here, and I don't really think it's a good thing for the Holy Father to confuse what is a gospel principle, taking care of the stranger among us, with some tough choices that have to be made in the policy realm.
Cardinal Robert Serra, I know you're reading his book. He is often mentioned as a possible candidate for the papacy. He made headlines this week decrying the use of the Bible to justify mass migration in a French interview. He said this: "It is better to help people flourish in their culture than to encourage them to come to Europe in full decadence. It is a false exegesis to use the Word of God to promote migration." Is Cardinal Serra correct here? Father Murray, very quickly.
Cardinal Serra is on the target here. The countries in Europe, the United States, and others, we should encourage countries in the third world to develop structures for economic development and political freedom so people don't feel the necessity to risk their lives to come to a place where they can earn their living. He also talks about the principle that people deserve a homeland and a culture, and it shouldn't be deprived of them. How often we see that in the case, particularly the third world, dictators loot the money, impoverish the people, and then, do nothing when people flee because it guarantees their power continues.
Robert Royal.
You know, one of the interesting things that came up during the Synod on Youth, and I was over there in Rome for that Synod, is, again, we tend to think of the immigration problem as, the first world being invaded by poor people from elsewhere. One of the points that came up among other bishops is, in these poorer countries, what happens when your young people, the most dynamic dimension of your society, leave and go elsewhere? What about the future of those countries? And so I think the Holy Father actually mentioned this on the plane also, that the developed countries can perhaps aid development in these developing countries. That's another part of this question that really has to be addressed, because otherwise we're going to have utter disasters in the developing world, even worse than the ones we see right now.
I got to move on. Before we get to the exhortation, very quickly, norms were changed this week at the Vatican City-State. The Pope did this. And he made a significant change. It's an expansion of the definition of vulnerable adult. The new wording defines a vulnerable adult as anyone in an infirm state of physical or mental deficiency or deprivation of personal freedom that, in fact, even occasionally limits their capacity to intend or to want or in any way to resist an offense. And here he's talking about sexual abuse. That's a pretty broad definition. Is this an improvement, Father Murray?
I think it is, because we have to recognize precisely the McCarrick case brought forward. When you have bishops using their seminarians for immoral purposes, holding the threat of throwing them out of the seminary if they don't agree. This is a violation precisely of their freedom to, as an individual, and also their relationship, strange relationship with the hierarchy. They want to obey their bishop, and the bishop has to do immoral things. So I think it's a good...
yeah, but should this be applied to the wider church? This is just the Vatican City State. Should it be applied to everybody so vulnerable adults are protected?
This is a good first step, and we can hope that it'll be developed further.
Yeah.
Sure.
Okay, I want to move on. Let's go to this exhortation. It's called Christ is Alive. It was issued on April 2nd. Beginning with the Pope's take on the meaning of change, he writes, the Church should not be excessively caught up in herself, but instead, and above all, reflect Jesus Christ. This means humbly acknowledging that some things concretely need to change. And if that is to happen, she needs to appreciate the vision, but also the criticisms of young people. So, Father, is this saying the Church needs to follow the direction of the youth of the day?
It can give that impression. Certainly, young people who are fed up with the clerical toleration of sexual abuse, they should be listened to. You know, young people like the Latin Mass and find obstacles, they can't get it in their diocese, they should be listened to. You know, young people who go to a Catholic school want to learn about Christ instead of getting sociology, they should be listened to. But, you know, when dealing with young people, the first category, I think, has to be, the Pope said it in paragraph 150, friendship with Christ. We don't approach Christ with a critical attitude. We tell people, look, this is the Son of God, listen to him, learn from him, then we go forth and we try to figure out how do we apply it today.
The document also says when you're forming young people, when you're reaching out to them, don't excessively focus on doctrine. Is that the problem?
Yeah, I've said this before on this show, but the Holy Father seems to have this idea that there's an overly rigid, moralistic, abstract approach to young people.
Yeah, like a 1945 idea of the faith, you know, something
I think
wagging
that
their finger.
I think it must correspond to something in his past experience. But my guess, I wrote a column about this just today at the Catholic thing. My guess is that the kind of thing that he's proposing, which is a more open, you know, pastoral reception of young people, has actually been the approach that we've had in places like the United States of America above all, but I think also in Europe to a large degree, and it only works to a certain extent. Now, he warns in the document that while we do want to get input from young people, we also don't want to just be part of whatever happens
Movement
to be
of
going
the day.
along in the country. I'll tell you, this is one example of something that came up during the synod that I think does reflect, sadly, the circumstances in the world these days. Some of the young people at one of the language groups said, look, no one is going to read a long document. And this is a very long, complicated document that he's written. What they're going to need to do at the end is to put together online interactive little bits of, you know, paragraph at a time that you can go through. Now, I mean, we can laugh at that, and it isn't the end point that we want to arrive at, but probably we do need something like that because, unfortunately, the young people that we're dealing with are not readers and they're not prepared for too much.
He also talks in this document, Father Murray, a little further on about being inclusive in youth ministry. The Synod called, this is a quote, the Synod called for the development of a youth ministry capable of being inclusive, with room for all kinds of young people, to show that we are a church with open doors, nor does one have to accept fully all the teachings of the church to take part in certain activities for young people. And Francis recommends including atheists and non-Catholics in youth groups. Good idea?
Yes and no. I mean, certainly in my parish experience, you do have kids who are very weak in their faith and questioning, and you don't want to turn them away. You want them to come. But whenever I hear the word inclusivity, I immediately think, oh, this is what the homosexual agenda people use to say we can't exclude that point of view. Well, we're not going to turn our Catholic youth groups into promoting homosexuality. We shouldn't think that we're doing something wrong when teaching the teaching of the church on this matter. And we should never give young people the false impression that the Catholic Church is somehow an exclusive group by virtue of teaching the truth. The truth will set us free. That's what we have to focus on. Now, everybody is welcome to come into that class, certainly.
Two quick things I have to get on, and this came up. My email box exploded when the Pope was in Morocco last weekend. He talked about proselytism and how you cannot proselytize. Don't work for converts. You are called to live side by side with people as brothers. Your reaction?
Well, the Vatican later tried to paper this over a little bit by citing John Paul II and also Benedict XVI, who said something similar. And, you know, strictly speaking, proselytism means sort of exerting pressure on people. And, of course, we don't want to do that. But look, it's an odd thing to do, to go to a Christian community, a tiny and troubled Christian community in a place like Morocco, which is overwhelmingly Islamic, and warning them about something that has got to be the most distant thing from their mind. I mean, if he wanted to say, look, you shouldn't be in conflict constantly with your neighbors. You should try to live in peace.
Right.
You know, we want to all help one another insofar as we're able to do this. I think that is a good message to send. To back Christians off from being outgoing and discussing their faith with other people, that just seems to me to be, first of all, not exactly the best message in the modern world, but particularly in a Muslim country, it just strikes me as a little bit inappropriate.
Yeah, I have to share this other bite with you. Again, this made headlines. It's kind of related. And the Pope at the Wednesday audience talked about why he went out to meet with the Muslim community in Morocco. And he underscored this point again, that God wills a diversity of religions in the world. He says this, but some may wonder, why does the Pope go to visit the Muslims and not only the Catholics? Because there are so many religions, and why are there so many religions? With the Muslims, we are descendants of the same father, Abraham. Why does God allow so many religions to exist? God wanted to allow this. The scholastic theologians referred to it as the permissive will of God. He willed to permit this reality. There are many religions, some are born of culture, but they always look to heaven, they look to God. Your reaction to the idea that God willed this and that we're all sons of Abraham?
Okay, the church teaches clearly God has willed Judaism as the chosen people, and then Christ, the Savior of Jew and Gentile, founded the Christian church, which is the fulfillment of the hope of Israel. Those are the only religions willed by God. Everything else is a human creation. We believe that. We do not believe that other people who are leaders of religions did that under divine inspiration to create rival interpretations of the meaning of salvation. The permissive will of God means God lets human beings make free choices on their own that God would not have otherwise chosen for himself to do. So this is an area that this caused a lot of controversy when the Pope said it originally, when he signed that agreement in Abu Dhabi.
Right.
I think he should basically issue a formal correction of this and say, look, there is only one church established by God, that is the Catholic Church, and that Judaism was the chosen people brought into the world in order that Christ might come and save Jew and Gentile. Those are the only religions revealed by God. That's what we teach.
Now, I know you've been getting Robert Royal, a lot of questions about this. I've been reading your coverage in the Catholic thing. This kind of statement does open up to a lot of misunderstanding. Put the Pope up to.
Because look, the average person just hears that the Pope says other religions
are equal, are on the same plane, or
if
equal.
you actually look at that document, this is a signed document, an agreement with the King of Abu Dhabi and then the Vatican. What it says is that God willed a plurality of religions, as he did a variety of races, nations, sexes,
Right.
etc. So this puts what is a spiritual decision on the same plane with what is
Races
a natural,
and nations.
it's a natural thing that has occurred in the world. Like with the proselytism question, I could have written this sentence, but no one at the Vatican asked me to do it.
Next year,
I think again what he wanted to say is that, of course, as Catholics, we believe that God has revealed to us how he wants us to live and who he is, etc. But as Catholics, part of what we believe God intends for us is to live as much as we can in peace and in cooperation with others who are willing to cooperate with us. That, I think, would have been the proper thing to do. Instead, what we have is a statement that has kind of theological and philosophical repercussions that just never end. And maybe Father is right. We need a formal, probably in writing correction so that we don't leave this mistaken impression with people around the world.
Well, we will await the correction. We'll leave it there. Posse, thank you for being here. Father Murray, Robert Royal. As always, you can catch the insightful commentary of the entire Posse at thecatholicthing.org. Steve Bannon's up next, but first, more news. The Communist government of China continues its crackdown on religious activity in the country. The Associated Press reports that cash incentives are being offered to citizens by local governments to spy on illegal religious groups. Some local authorities are offering up to $15,000 for information on the activities of members and leaders of house churches, illegal church buildings, and the promotion of what they call religious extremism. These efforts are part of a larger government campaign against all religious activity in China, despite its claims of religious freedom. Joining me now with his thoughts on all of this and much more is former White House Chief Strategist and founder of Citizens of the American Republic, Steve Bannon. Welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me,
Great
Raymond.
to see you. There's a lot I want to get into with you here, but I need to start with this. The Pope was on the plane earlier this week coming back from Morocco, and he had this to say when asked about walls and those who would build them. Watch.
I costruttori di muri siano di filo di alambre tagliati con coltelli, siano di mattoni, diventeranno prigionieri dei muri che fanno.
Your reaction?
This is, the Pope has been constantly, it's one of the things I've got a problem, not with the dogma or the theology, but he has been after the populist, nationalist sovereignty movement since he became Pope. He's gone after Donald Trump consistently. He implied that you shouldn't vote for Trump. He is in the face of Salvini, Orban, all the nationalists trying to solve the migrant issue, this horrible migrant crisis you have in Italy and in Hungary and in Europe that they're trying to take care of. And the Pope continually derides the efforts of these politicians to try to solve it and not, make sure it's not solved on the back of working class people in Europe or the United States. And I got to tell you, I think it's now to the point of being unacceptable. He hammers the populist nationalist sovereignty and takes the side of the globalists, the Macrons of the world, the Merkels of the world in every situation.
So you don't like the Pope speaking out on political issues?
Listen, I think he's choosing sides. It's not about speaking out.
Well, he would say this is the church's social teaching, and he's trying to defend that.
Well, I think he's got to me, that the social teaching here is about sovereignty and about subsidiarity. That's what the church teaches. And here you have elected officials that in many cases have been elected by overwhelming majorities that are trying to work with authorities to come to a solution of this horrific migrant crisis, and here he continually derides them. His comments like this, you know, they're essentially building prisons. His distaste for Donald Trump is very well known since he came to Mexico on his visit several years ago and had the mass at the border and essentially implied that Trump's policies are racist, they're nativist, they're xenophobic.
Anti-Christian.
Anti-Christian. I don't think this adds anything to the dialogue, and I think he's turning off a lot of people, particularly a lot of conservative Catholics, who are trying to get their countries back and make sure their countries do not implode because of this migrant issue.
I've got to get into something else. You and a group of Washington policy advisors, former government officials, have revived a Cold War-era advocacy group called the Committee on Present Danger, and you're really focusing on China. Give me your sense of why you believe China is such a threat to the United States.
Look, it's the existential threat. They've been in economic war with us for 25 years. If you look at One Belt, One Road, Made in China 2025, the 5G rollout, they are trying to both an information war and cyber war, and also what they're doing economically. They're trying to become the new hegemon in this totalitarian mercantilist system they've got. This is why I'm so opposed, and I've gone to the Vatican a couple of times. We actually were the first person ever to broadcast from the Vatican live into China on VPNs, not on broadcast, so people could hear it, during the summit to talk about this deal that the Vatican has cut with the Chinese Communist Party. They've essentially turned over the ability to select bishops. They've thrown the underground church, and people should understand, the underground Catholic Church in China is a church of living saints. They're probably the most persecuted church in the world outside of certain elements of the Middle East. And Cardinal Zen, who is arguably the holiest man in Asia,
been on here many times.
Cardinal Zen, I'm telling you, is such a special individual. When Cardinal Zen says that this deal is terrible, it's got to be reversed, it can't be signed, I think we have to listen to Cardinal Zen. And what upsets me so much is that during this whole crisis, where there's no discussion at all about the laity getting involved at all, here, the Vatican, in a secret deal, and they admit it's secret.
They haven't released it.
Well, I tell you why it's secret. I think they have not released it, and they're not going to release it. They've signed this deal with the Chinese Communist Party, which is a atheistic a political institution that has suppressed the Uyghurs in Western Asia. It's suppressed the Dalai Lama. It's suppressed the evangelical Christians. The living church of the Catholic Church underground is one of the most vibrant Catholic churches in the world, and we have essentially turned them over to their slave masters, and this is unacceptable. And here's the reason, Raymond, I think it's secret. I think when this, and this is what I'm calling for, the transparency and accountability, like the Pope always talks about the summit, about the crisis. All we want is transparency and accountability. When you see that document, I think you're going to see, Raymond, that it's got a path to full diplomatic relationships between the Vatican and the Chinese Communist Party.
Now, Archbishop Celi, who negotiated the deal, okay, Claudio Celi, who's been on this show before, he said he does not believe the deal was a sellout to the communist government. And as some in the underground church have said, what did you hear when you were in Rome? You were just there.
I've heard it's a total sellout. Number one, here's you see the sellout. Two of the great bishops from the underground church have already had to resign. They've been, since then, they've torn down other churches. Just the other day, one of the major provinces in China started offering cash money for people to become informants on the underground church. Here you have one day after the other of oppression of this church, and all the details are secret. Here's what I say to the Cardinal. If it's so good, let's just review it.
Let's read it.
You know, by the way, the Treaty of Vienna, I think the Accord of Vienna, in 1961, the Vatican had to agree to become part of the United Nations, that there can be no more secret agreements, no more secret treaties. In fact, I think next fall they're talking about Pius XII, the agreements he signed with both Mussolini and Hitler will now become fully open to the public, right? Why are we going through this again? And particularly, the Chinese Communist Party is dedicated to the destruction of all religions, not just the Catholic Church. Why would we ever allow the Chinese Communist Party have a say-so in who select the bishops and take their side of our cardinals' ends?
Now, you've created a fund, the Rule of Law Fund.
Yes.
You've got $100 million there.
Yes.
In an interview, you said you were considering filing a lawsuit against the Vatican. On what
in the
grounds?
Rule of Law Fund, and here's the reason. It was the Rule of Law Fund that sponsored the broadcast from the roof of the convent overlooking St. Peter's. People in China are fascinated by this because they understand that this living church that we've got is the most dedicated Catholics and some of the best people in China, and this is being abused. They've been 100%. The Rule of Law Fund, which is not made up of Catholics, it's made up of expatriate Chinese, have said, we have got to get to the bottom of this. One of the things we do in Rule of Law is do investigations of all the missing, all people put in prison, the suicide rates that's gone up in China. You know, China's had this tremendous suppression of freedom under President Xi. This cadre that runs the Chinese Communist Party is more radical than Mao Zedong. And so the Rule of Law Fund said, what we want you to do, Steve, is not just broadcast. We want to get the word out to the West, get word out to Catholics that may not understand the situation the cardinals then in the underground churches, but also we want to do and be as helpful as possible to do anything that's legal to get this, if nothing more than just to get it in front of the Catholic faithful about what this deal says.
So they realize what.
But here's what I said, Raymond, if there's a process in this deal that goes to full diplomatic relationships, that means we're throwing Taiwan under the bus, we're throwing Hong Kong under the bus, we're throwing all the Christians and all the Catholics in East Asia under the bus.
Let's talk for a second, and it connects. You say the Chinese are not to be trusted. You say Xi is more radical than Mao.
Yes.
Yet, at this hour, Robert Lighthizer and our trade diplomats in the United States are in China trying to negotiate a last-minute deal.
Yes.
Can they be trusted, and why is Trump attempting to negotiate trade deals with people who, as you said, can't be trusted?
This is a great point. Okay. President Trump has done something that the permanent political class has not done in 30 years. One of the reasons he's president is the deplorables, the working class people, looked at and said, we don't want America in decline anymore. The elites in this country it was about managed decline. A big part of that is shipping our manufacturing base over to China. J.D. Vance, the great sociologist who wrote the book Hillbilly Elegies about Trump, he cites the studies from MIT and Harvard that show a direct correlation between the factories that went to China, the jobs that went with them, and the opioid crisis. What you've done is take away people's self-worth. You've taken away their dignity. And so it's critical to get those manufacturing jobs back. What Trump has said is we have to reorganize the Chinese economy. He's got Lighthizer in. Remember he said in the State of the Union, structural changes in the Chinese economy. That's why this is so tough. Trump is sitting there going, I don't know if we can trust these guys, but we're going to put this in. This trade deal is literally the central part of his presidency because the industrial democracies, Japan, all of NAFTA, you know, Canada, the United States, and Europe are all going to hang together on what happens in China. And this is why it's so important. I was in the Vatican last week. She's in China signing a 30 deals worth $35 billion to build a $10 billion port near Venice, to put all this infrastructure.
He's calling it a gateway to Europe.
Absolutely.
And the
They're-
Italians are primed for this because their economy is collapsing.
The economy's collapsed, and they, you know, hopefully the United States is now going to start to focus and work with people like Salvini and start to help rebuild this and get better trade relationships, better trade deals. What's happened is needing this money for infrastructure. China's come. This One Belt, One Road is a geopolitical infrastructure project.
Trojan horse.
Exactly, to unite the Eurasian landmass, okay? And they're doing it, and it's predatory capitalism. What they do is lend the money you can't pay back, then they foreclose on the asset, then they take control.
And they've already got a presence then in the country.
100%. The Chinese are not to be trusted. The Chinese people are wonderful people. That's what you see in our underground church, one of the most vibrant Catholic churches in the world. This radical cadre is not to be trusted, and that's why I think you're seeing Trump with Lighthizer put in very tough details,
Well,
enforcement in this deal.
And this is the first administration, right or left, a Republican or Democrat, that has ever called the Chinese on the great trade inequity that has been there. Our trade deficit was what, in the hundreds of millions of
Oh,
dollars?
it's just $600 million. It's
It's
unbelievable.
crazy.
We are essentially a tributary state. The way it is now, we're Jamestown to their Great Britain. We send them soybeans, we send wheat, we send oil and gas. We don't send any finished manufacturing products. They've taken the Boeings, they've taken the Apples, they make all the that's what Made in China 2025 is, a convergence of advanced chip design, artificial intelligence, robotics, that they will dominate advanced manufacturing, and we will be a component parts manufacturer, of raw materials, and a market for them. We will be a tributary state, essentially a colony for China. That's why Trump, for the first time in 30 years, is the first guy to confront this.
Do you think that's why he's getting such pushback?
It's huge. Wall Street, first off, Wall Street is the investor relations department for the Chinese Communist Party is Wall Street. They're the ones that are putting pressure on saying the stock market's going to collapse, you have to get a deal. And they're framing it as all soybeans and wheat. You can't buy your way out of this.
This sounds like the Mexican deal where he's saying, I'm going to shut down the border. And they're saying, what about our avocados and our tequila? Well, I mean,
Listen, the pressure on Trump, this is about American decline. The Wall Street hedge fund guys, they just care about the next trade. They don't care about the country in a slow decline that's being managed to the bad outcomes of working class people. It's working class people that have revolted on this and have Trump's back. That's why Trump's able to take on the new NAFTA agreement, and that's why he's able to take on China.
Before I leave this conversation, you mentioned Xi in Rome last week.
Yes.
The Vatican requested an interview with him and said, please come and meet the Pope. He turned them down cold. Why did he do that? Since they're giving him everything he wanted.
Listen, it was as a Catholic, it was so embarrassing to be in Rome last week and to see the Catholic Church reaching out and essentially begging Xi, this dictator, to come and have a photo op and to have a meeting.
With the Pope.
With the Pope. Xi backed it off for one reason. I don't think he wanted to be on the stage with them and give them any additional prestige with him. This is the shocking thing. This is what happens when you show weakness. This is what happens essentially when you grovel. The Chinese Communist Party respects strength. That's what they respect, and they fear Donald Trump because Trump's the first guy of any political party, Republican or Democrat, to stand up to him. He's the first one of any establishment to stand up to him. And his leadership's bringing Europe along. It's brought Canada along. Canada was the one that arrested the CFO of Huawei. They put her under arrest so we could extradite her. So you see Canada coming along. The rest of the world is now focused on all the problems that China has caused us, the Chinese Communist Party. Here, the Vatican, essentially beseeching, it's so humiliating, beseeching a dictator to have a photo op and have the dictator say no. I mean, this is what's so embarrassing. And I think this is part of the story I'm trying to get out there. People have to start to focus on what the Pope, look, the Pope is the vicar of Christ. Nobody makes an argument about that. You know, with the direct lineage and succession on things of dogma and theology. But the administrative and the political side of the church are different. And now we're in a situation that he's cutting deals with dictators and refusing to open up about it. On the crisis, they're refusing to focus on this financial and economic tsunami that's about to overwhelm us. And
You're talking about the sex abuse crisis. What did you think of that summit? They had a big summit. Very little came out of it. The Pope published this document, which we're going to get into in a moment. Your thoughts on what we heard? They say we're going to be transparent. They say this is evil. Have they attacked the problem as you see it? And what do you see as the next wave of this crisis?
Raymond, you've been covering this since 2003, almost 20 years. This is the greatest crisis the church has had since the Reformation, okay? And it's got to be treated as a crisis. They came over to this. I was an outside observer of the summit. I just want to see kind of what rolled. Here's what so shocked me. The term they never brought up for the families, for the people who go to church today, for the media, for the politicians, for everybody, was zero tolerance. Zero tolerance never came up. They talked about accountability and transparency, but there's no plan. There's no plan, and here's my concern about it. If you look at the North American church, and the reason they had the summit is to shut down the American bishops trying to do something. Right now, if you look at Pennsylvania, if you read, and all of your viewers should go online and read all 300 pages of what happened in Pennsylvania, because you're going to see more of this, okay? This Pennsylvania tells you what's happening in the future. I think New York State's already impaneled a grand jury.
New York State, Virginia, all across the country, California, all across the country, AG inquiries are underway today.
These are at state levels. AG inquiries, and here's what you're going to see. I think these are going to get kicked up to federal crimes, because I think you're going to see about crossing interstate. Number one. Number two, I believe they're going to go to RICO statutes. I think what they're going to do is impanel grand juries on criminal charges. I think they're going to start looking at RICO, what they used to do with the mob, to be able to seize assets. I'm saying leave the theology aside, leave the dogma aside. Let's talk about the administrative apparatus of the church. It's evident to me that we're hurtling down a situation where the financial and administrative function of the church could be liquidated. We could have a liquidation of the Catholic Church in North America in the next 10 or 15 years.
How do we avoid it?
I think here's you avoid it. I think laity, both conservative Catholics and progressives, leave your politics aside. We have to come together, I think, to reach out and try to help, not just the diocese, but on a national level, the Conference of Bishops has to have an outside, I don't know if it's a tribunal or some sort of group that comes together that knows how the protection of assets, bankruptcy, financial. This is not a discussion of what the victims deserve. If you were over there at the summit and around Rome and saw this, these people's lives have been destroyed. It is unbelievable the damage that's been done. And I got to tell you, the other thing the summit brought up is in the areas of the church where we're growing, in India, in sub-Saharan Africa, in Latin America, there's a whole new wave of this that's just coming up.
Right.
We're only at the top of the first inning in this. People said, well, all this is past. These priests have all died. It's, you know, we've gotten through this so far. It's not a crisis. I said, you got to be kidding me. This is actually the beginning of it, and now you're going to get the legal apparatus involved, and these strike lawyers don't care about the church one way or the other.
No, they're going to pillage the patrimony, of the church. Buildings and property, assets.
What has been built on the second collections of working class people in Europe and the United States, okay, with $5 and $10, right, week in and week out for 2 millennia, is going to be wiped out in 10 years unless we volunteer and get involved, and the bishops and the Vatican is open to that involvement. What I saw in the Vatican last week, it's completely dismissive. They have no interest in the laity be involved. They have no interest in listening to anybody. They refuse to talk about zero tolerance. They talk about some nebulous accountability and that, but you don't see it. You don't see transparency. You don't see accountability. There's no action plan.
I've got to talk about this institute, an academy that you are launching in Italy. I will tell you, I got calls about this when the story first emerged. There are some people very concerned, nervous, that Steve Bannon is coming to Italy and starting what you were calling a institute to defend the Judeo Christian West.
Yes.
What is
the gladiator school? Right now, you see Soros. One of the reasons Soros is so effective in Europe. And look, I disagree with Soros's ideology 100%. George Soros. But I admire the way he's done things. What he's done is built up cadres and networks of people. We don't have that on the right. You're starting to see it. Marianne Le Pen, Marianne Michel in Lyon, France, is building a school to have Catholicism taught at a managerial level. You see Armando Siri in Milan. What we're doing is the Academy of the Judeo Christian West in Tresolti Monastery, just south of Rome. It's a monastery that's around almost for 800 years.
Right.
We won a tender, and we've taken control of it for the next 20, 25 years. Wow. And what we're going to do is really build, is to help educate people on the tenets of the Judeo Christian West, people from late 20s to early 40s, maybe looking for another career. We're also going to instill in them the single-mindedness of a gladiator. We're going to reinforce Catholic teaching. We're going to reinforce what you need to do in the modern world to make things happen, and we're going to start graduating classes, and those will go back and work in political institutions, in NGOs, hopefully in the church. empowered with the tenets of our civilization. We think that our civilization needs to be defended, and it needs to be defended by people that are trained to defend it. And so one of the things we're going to do the first day you show up, you're going to have a pressure interview like this. You're going to have a guy sit there, ask you all kind of questions, and understand I don't know how to answer. And we're going to have you trained up by the end of the year to say you can go you can make any presentation, you can go to any corporate board, you can go walk on any stage and make a speech, or you can do an interview at CNN, and you will be successful, right? You will be able to promulgate the great values and traditions of our faith and our culture.
Some Italians who were opposed to this academy, the gladiator school moving in, have said, wait a minute, this was founded as a stronghold for peace, and Steve Bannon wants to transform it into this international populism, anti-European unity school. This is not what the building was ever constructed for.
Exact opposite. The building was absolutely constructed for the defense. What these monks, I think it was Pope Innocent III, what they did is they built this to defend the Judeo Christian West, the tenets of it. We're not there to destroy anything. What we want is people to go out and be able to defend the Treaty of Westphalia, the nation state and the Westphalian system in a free citizenry, subsidiarity, basic Catholic teaching where decision making is put down on the citizens. What in Europe, what you're seeing is not this lack of support for the United States of Europe is turning into support for a Europe of nations, and that's a Europe that Italy is not South Carolina to France's North Carolina, that Italy is Italy, Hungary's Hungary, Poland's Poland, and its people and free citizens that know how to defend it and help to promulgate its culture. And that's why I think we're having such intense interest in the school. This school is going to be one of the great instruments of peace, I think, in the future. It's a long-term project. We won't see the impact of this in 10 and 20, 30 years from now as young people go out. But they will be able to go out and defend the basic tenets of the Judeo Christian West in whatever organization they work in.
Which are the roots of Europe.
It's the roots of Europe. And by the way, that became the roots of America.
Right.
This is the Judeo Christian West has accomplished and done so much for mankind, and it's developed such great institutions. But like I tell people, I gave a speech last week at the Angelica Biblica Tech, founded by the Augustan monks. And I said, St. Augustine was from Roman Africa, Numidia. He was a Berber. The original people around him were all Arabs. This has nothing to do with exclusivity of race, exclusivity of ethnicity. One of the great things about the Catholic Church and even Europe and the United States, it's inclusive. It is the concept that includes people. And that's what we say we're so proud of the Judeo Christian West, of this convergence of faith and reason. Right? And that's what this academy is going to be about.
The question I always get, when this started bubbling up, when people started hearing this, and it's a personal question, why is Steve Bannon doing this? I imagine you're a practicing Catholic. Are you?
Yeah. Here's why, because I come from a very humble blue-collar family, right? Lineman for the phone company, my grandfather for 50 years, my father for 50 years with the phone company, a Catholic family. You know, my mom was a homemaker the entire time, 5 kids, you know, very traditionally Catholic, eventually became part of the Latin Mass Catholics when that was allowed back into our diocese. Look, the Catholic Church has meant so much, Western civilization, this nation. You know, I've been fortunate enough after the Navy and Harvard and Goldman Sachs to make enough money to be able to focus. The reason I was selected for Trump's campaign, I've worked on this populist nationalist project for 10 years, right? I'm going to work on it for the next 10, if I stay healthy. So in this revolution is now worldwide.
I got to get this in before we run out of time. Mueller probe is over.
Yeah.
You have Gerald Nadler and the Judiciary Committee subpoenaing the entire Mueller report. Despite grand jury testimony, they want it all. They're also saying they're going to subpoena Steve Bannon to testify. Will you appear?
Well, here's the point. I take the advice of my lawyers. My lawyers will coordinate with the White House. Here's the people don't focus on. President Trump waived executive privilege. President Trump waived attorney-client privilege. Look who went up there. Don McGahn, the White House counsel, the Chief of Staff, Reince Priebus, Steve Bannon, the senior strategist and senior advisor. 1.5 million documents. 500 people were witnesses. I think they had 2,800 subpoenas. I mean, Trump went overboard. No president in history has ever given more information. And listen, Mueller, and I've said this from day one, he's a combat veteran, he's an American hero, he came back, no collusion, and he basically said, because he didn't prosecute anybody, there's been no obstruction of justice. What the Democrats want to do is just put Trump through the gauntlet. I will follow whatever my attorneys did. We've already announced that we turned over for the campaign, not my time at the White House, for the campaign, we turned over 2,800 800 pages of documents. I take the lead here, but I got to tell you, I think President Trump will make the final call. He fully cooperated to a degree no president has. I think he's saying, hey, look, guys, if you want to see anything like that, go to the report and read the testimony. Other than that, let's move on.
Steve Bannon,
Thanks
thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Pleasure. This past weekend, the film Unplanned defied all expectations, coming in number 4 at the U.S. box office. The film earned an opening weekend of $6.1 million, double the amount projected, and it was only released on 1,000 screens. The movie tells the true story of Abby Johnson, a former Planned Parenthood clinic director who quit the organization after witnessing an abortion on ultrasound. She became a pro-life activist and now runs a pro-life ministry, and then there were none, helping people leave the abortion industry. Returning to discuss the success of the film is its star, ASHLEY BRATCHER, who joins me here in studio, and Abby Johnson via Skype from Texas. Ladies, thank you both for being here. The last time we spoke, ASHLEY, you all did not have a distributor. You were not really sure how wide a distribution you'd get, and success was uncertain. What happened this past weekend?
God moved. He really did.
And a lot of people, apparently, to the Cineplex.
Of course, America got behind us. This is something that people are supporting and talking about, and the success has been incredible.
Why do you think that is? Was it just time for this message that has been so kept under wraps and suppressed? And we'll get into some of the ways that suppression has been going on. Is that part of it, a pent-up interest in this topic?
I think so, and with it being such a controversial topic in politics, it's been at the headline of everything that you've read in the news lately.
Right.
It was a perfect time for it to come out, and we didn't plan it. God just orchestrated this timing for us. I wish I could say we were marketing geniuses, but that's just not the case.
Abby, what have people told you as they've seen this film and really re-walked in your footsteps? What have they told you? Has it changed minds? Has it changed hearts?
Yeah, we are hearing that. Actually, I'm waking up every single morning to dozens of Facebook and Twitter and Instagram messages from people telling me they walked into the theater pro-choice. They walked in to see the film sort of as a critic, and they walked out pro-life. And we're already hearing of babies that have been saved. Their moms went in and watched this film to see, what abortion was actually about. And babies are being saved, hearts are being changed. And, there was a lot of talk about, you're sort of preaching to the choir here, right? But I receive probably about 150 messages a day since the movie has come out. And 90% of those are people who are saying, yes, I've been pro-life, but I've never done anything. I've never done anything to actually be pro-life. And so it's not just about preaching to the choir here with this film. We're teaching the choir how to sing. We're teaching them how to get involved and how to actually be activated in this movement.
Yeah, and the film very honestly depicts various faces of people both in Planned Parenthood as well as people on the pro-life side, and you see good people and extreme people on both sides. It honestly deals with that. Tell me for a moment, ASHLEY, about the R rating that the Motion Picture Association of America labeled this film, said it's R-rated. Were you all worried that would hurt the audience appeal for this film?
I wasn't worried for a second, but I also believed that it was going to get an R rating because I think abortion is rated R. It is violent. The MPAA agreed with us. They said that's the only reason we got an R rating. It was for violence. That's a pretty bold statement coming from the MPAA. And I think because it got that rating, a lot of people thought, wait a minute, girls across the nation can go get an abortion without parental consent, but they can't go see a movie about abortion? What is that about?
Abby, were you astounded that even Twitter shut down your account for a while? Then there was such protest, they reinstalled it. But it drew a lot more followers to your account. I mean, now you all are above, you have more followers than Planned Parenthood.
Yeah, I mean, we're sort of like, thanks, Twitter, because all of the Twitter outrage just caused more people to go check out what was going on and follow our account. I do want to say, though, that I went to Planned Parenthood's account while our account was being censored. Planned Parenthood's account was in tip-top shape. I was able to follow it. There was no problem there.
Interesting. Ashley, you are from the state of Georgia. Just the other night on Fox, I covered this story of Alyssa Milano, the actress trying to show Georgia, I guess, who's the boss. She is threatening a boycott, a Hollywood boycott of productions in the state if what's called the heartbeat bill is passed in the legislature. Your reaction to Hollywood basically trying to hold a state hostage, and your reaction to it?
Well, I thought that Alyssa's letter was very self-motivated. It focused more on the tax incentives than it really did on what a woman's reproductive rights looked like in Georgia. It was more about how much money they're bringing into the industry here, as opposed to addressing the actual issue. So for me, it seemed like it was really self-motivated. And if she's so concerned about the working environment in Georgia and not having a safe working environment, it seems like she'd be able to get out of her contract since she's contractually obligated to work in Georgia.
Yeah, well, remember when Stacey Abrams lost the race for governor, she tried to boycott, and now she's trying it again. But the good people of Georgia, you're giving the film industry $300 million in tax rebates a year. Where I'm from in Louisiana, we call that welfare. So you're giving Hollywood welfare, and now they're telling you what you can and can't pass and how you can protect unborn children or not. It seems to me they really crossed a line.
Yeah, and I just want to applaud Governor Kemp because he came out and he said, I can't govern the state based on what one person in Hollywood thinks of me, and maybe a couple of others, but he's going to do what he told the people he's going to do, and I applaud him for that.
Well, I was astounded to find there's no cost-benefit analysis that's been done on the state between the $300 million that's given to Hollywood and the $2 billion in economic activity. How does that really translate? What does that really mean? And could that money be used better elsewhere? I'll bet Georgia starts looking into it now. Before I let you all go, tell me, Abby and Ashley, the reaction of the audience, the internal polling was through the roof on this movie, and what do you expect this weekend?
Yeah, I think we're going to see, people are excited about the film. We know that people are going out the second weekend. I have a friend that has seen the film 9 times.
Oh boy!
Because she keeps bringing people with her. She's bringing her pro-choice friends. She's bringing people from her church, and so I think people understand the importance of going out that second weekend too, to fill the theaters. I'm getting messages. Theaters are still sold out. Even, on a Tuesday afternoon, theaters are still sold out. There's still a lot of interest in this film. The secular liberal media is finally starting to pick up on the story. Comedians are making fun of us, which is awesome. So, we're getting a lot of media attention right now, and it's only going to help escalate interest and intrigue in what this story is about.
Ashley, what are you hoping from this weekend?
I hope the same thing that Abby's saying. People that have already seen the film will bring more people to see it, especially their children. Because if we as parents and grandparents and aunts and uncles aren't speaking to our children about abortion, Planned Parenthood is. They're already in our public school system. So if you have a child and you've already seen the movie, I highly encourage parents to go back now because you know what to expect.
This is a taboo subject, particularly in Hollywood. Have you gotten any backlash? Heard anything?
Hardly anything.
Really?
Yeah, I'd say that 98% of the feedback has been incredibly positive, minus the one person who just has the crazy tweet to throw out at you.
Those are called people living in mommy's basement. Ignore them. Great to see you both. Abby, Ashley, thank you for being here. And we will be on top of this story and cover how Unplanned does on its second weekend. Unplanned, based on the story of Abby Johnson, starring ASHLEY BRATCHER, is now in theaters everywhere. Check your local listings. It's a powerful film. Art can make a difference, but only if people support it. Last week, I announced the winners of my Will Wilder 3, The Amulet of Power audiobook giveaway. Thanks to all of you who entered, and congratulations to the winner. The audiobooks will be going out very soon. Will Wilder 3, the print and the audio version, make incredible Easter gifts for the young adventurer or not so young adventurer in your life, and it's available everywhere. Be sure to stay with us until next week. The show continues on Facebook and Twitter. Like me on Facebook, you can follow me on Twitter. The links are at RaymondArroyo.com. Be sure to catch us next week. Until then, we'll be scouting the world over for all that is seen and unseen. On behalf of the staff and crew of EWTN News, thank you for watching. I'm Raymond Arroyo from Washington, D.C. Bye now.